On the night of Saturday the 12th of December to Sunday the 13th of December 1981, martial law was declared by the communist government in Poland. The declared aim was economic. The shops were empty, ration cards were issued for even basic staple goods, wildcat strikes were commonplace. This was the very definition of economic mismanagement. The president of the Polish People's Republic, Wojciech Jaruzelski, said in his televised speech, which was broadcast on the television and radio from early in the morning of the 13th of December, that the aim in declaring martial law was to repair the economy, adding that he realized that force would not resolve the issue and that the aim was not to install a military dictatorship. In this video, I shall look at the case of what happened in the Gdansk shipyard, contrasting contemporary photographs with video of what it looks like today. This is just to look at the events of December 1981, and I'm not going to take it much further than that. Today on the site of the shipyard there's a wonderful museum which describes the history of the communist regime in Poland, including the events I am about to describe, and I would strongly urge a visit to it. The declaration of martial law meant that the country was now ruled by a council called the Military Council of National Salvation, that's WRON, or in Polish, Wojskowa Rada Ocalenia Narodowego. Here we can see them in their meeting of the 14th of December 1981. In Latin America and Africa, military juntas appeared all the time, or indeed appear all the time, the idea possibly being that the army is good at organizing things. Now, anyone who's ever been in an army will know how much nonsense that is, and furthermore, Jaruzelski has had several months to resolve the economic crisis. Nearly all of the military officers in WRON, were Communist Party members. Some of them had roles within the government even earlier. Therefore, given that they had been unable to resolve this situation earlier, it's unlikely at best that they would do so now. Indeed, the entire economic mismanagement was caused by the very same communist system. The repression was organized well in advance. Here we have an order dated the 23rd of October 1980 with a list in order of importance of whom to arrest. First is Lech Wałęsa, next Bogdan Lis, next Andrzej Kołodziej, and then Henryka Krzywonos. Martial law happened during a very cold winter when life for many people in industrial centres was already difficult due to food shortages. The plan for martial law was drawn up to a large extent by General Czesław Kiszczak, as the first thing the communist authorities did was to arrest trade union leaders and the others opposed the regime. Then organisational leadership amongst the opposition was lacking. This was facilitated as Solidarity was then holding meetings in Gdansk, and so opposition leaders were all in one place at one time. All the communist authorities had to do was to surround the hotels where the out-of-towners were staying. Others were picked up on their way to or at the main railway station. Such people include Zbigniew Bujak, Władysław Frasyniuk, Bronisław Geremek, Zbigniew Janas, Janusz Szelwski, Zbigniew Romaszewski, and Tadeusz Mazowiecki. To add to the confusion, although there had been warnings of impending martial law, telephones had been cut off and communication was severely restricted. Nonetheless, by the time Monday came around, it was clear that there would be a series of sit-in strikes throughout the country. As it happened, there were at least 199 strikes, 47 of which were in the Gdansk region. The communist authorities expected strikes and planned for them. The plan was to resolve them using 3 steps, or 3 phases. In phase 1, representatives of the prosecutor's office, the police and the Polish People's Army visited the strikers in order to negotiate peacefully. They pointed out that in times of martial law, To refuse a military order could result in very serious punishment, including the death penalty. If this did not work out, they would give a demonstration of strength, using military equipment such as tanks and armoured personnel carriers to block off roads and entrances to places of employment. This was accompanied by appeals made using loudspeakers appealing to the strikers to conform. A T-72 tank has a 125mm smoothbore cannon, a 7.62 coaxial machine gun, and a 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine gun, while the strikers had their bare fists. Nonetheless, if a show of force did not work, then real force was used. 40 such sit-in strikes were broken by the use of force, most of them in places where there are a lot of employees, such as the coal mines in Silesia, the shipyards and ports in the north of the country, the steelworks in Katowice and Kraków, or the Ursus tractor factory in Warsaw, amongst many others. The communist authorities expected trouble in Gdansk. 10 years earlier, in December 1970, strikes had been put down by force, resulting in many deaths. One of those responsible then was Wojciech Jaruzelski, who was now president. Gdansk was a symbol. It was where the August agreements had been signed the previous year, which had given birth to solidarity. Logically, if Gdansk could be controlled, it would act as a symbol for the rest of the country, which would then fall in line. Lech Wałęsa, leader of the Solidarity trade union, returned to his flat at Gdansk Zaspa after midnight in the early hours of Sunday the 13th of December 1981 from the meetings of the Solidarity National Committee. At around 1 in the morning, Solidarity activists came to him with information about the arrests. Nevertheless, he went to bed. At 02:45, the doorbell woke him up. He was greeted by the first secretary of the Polish United Workers' Party in Gdansk, Tadeusz Fischbach, the Gdansk provisional governor, Jerzy Kołodziejski, and with them a militia unit with crowbars and other equipment designed to smash down the door. After a short conversation, Wałęsa was led out of the house, taken to the airport in Rębiechowo, and from there was transferred by plane to Warsaw. In the offices of the Health and Safety Inspector in the Gdansk shipyard, shown here, the National Committee of Solidarity met. A large part of the union leaders had been detained by the police, but those who managed to avoid arrest established strike committees. The National Strike Committee was established with its chairman Mirosław Krupinski, the Regional Strike Committee with 31-year-old Stanisław Wodakowski, and the company strike committees in workplaces where Solidarity operated. At around 1:15 at night, about 400 ZOMO functionaries stormed the regional headquarters of Solidarity in Gdansk Rzeszcz in ulice Grunwaldzkiej. ZOMO is the paramilitary police, and I'll do a separate video on them. At that time, the building housed a number of Solidarity activists, including Zygmunt Błażek, Arkadiusz Rybicki, and Andrzej Składowski. They were expecting a visit from the authorities. Zygmunt Błażek had been listening to radio traffic, and it was clear that the communists were about to crack down on the Free Trade Union. The ZOMO action ran very smoothly. They cut off the electricity, forced an entry, and arrested everyone. Around 2 in the morning, the detainees were transported to Pszczółki Gdańskie, and after interrogation, they were transferred to the internment camp at Szczebilinek near Wejherowo. The operation of securing the headquarters of the union was completed at around 5 in the morning, with the removal of some materials and equipment, including union documentation, printed material and printing equipment, which was all examined in detail by the security services. On Sunday, the 13th of December, people were not at work, and the paramilitary police, ZOMO, used the chance to occupy the shipyard, arresting a dozen or so people, mainly those gathered at the entrance to the plant. The following day, when the shipyard workers came to work, they voted to hold a sit-in strike. A regional strike committee was established on the premises, headed by Stanisław Wodakowski, and the company strike committee, chaired by Alojzy Szlablewski. The director of the shipyard ordered the workforce to finish for the day at 14:15, and some employees left, but more than half volunteered to stay overnight. A priest, Father Bronisław Sroka, celebrated a mass for them at around 9 in the evening. At around 1 in the morning of the 15th of December 1981, more than 800 ZOMO functionaries entered the shipyard supported by units of the 8th Mechanized Division of the Polish People's Army, shown here in the street, which is just outside the main entrance to the shipyard. The strikers offered a policy of passive resistance, which allowed ZOMO to detain 51 people, 9 of whom were to find themselves in long-term confinement. Nonetheless, ZOMO, in the vast expanse of the shipyard, was unable to locate the leaders of the protest. ZOMO was withdrawn from the shipyard in the afternoon because, in the opinion of their superiors, they established too friendly relations with the people on strike and local residents who supported the strikers. As a result, the strike continued. It was continued not only by those who managed to hide during the initial assault, but also by those who came or returned to the Gdansk shipyard from their homes. At least 400 people stayed at the plant for the night, including 150 shipyard workers, 150 people from other workplaces, and 100 university students. The protest was now led by Bogdan Boroshevich and Anna Valentinovich. The strikers blocked the entrance gates and controlled the walls of the shipyard. One unhappy person at that time was the first secretary of the local Communist Party, Mieczysław Habowski. He deplored the tardiness of the security forces and demanded that the Solidarity activists be brought before a court-martial, which of course could have resulted in death sentences being handed out. Many people had slipped through the net. The shipyard occupied a very large area of the city. You can walk around it today. It takes quite a long time to get around it. It's just walking on the edge. Furthermore, it was clear that the militia and the army did not want to do a good job, and in some cases gave overt signs of fraternization with the workers and the public, which is borne out by photographs taken at the time. By the morning of the 14th of December 1981, it was not just the shipyard that was on strike, but at least 46 other institutions in the Gdansk region, including the Gdansk Ship Repair Yard, Port of Gdansk, Gdansk Petroleum Refinery, the Ship Engineering Works, that's Centrum Techniki Okrętowe, Port of Gdynia, Gdynia Shipyard, Electronics Producers and Assemblers, Elektromontaż, Elmo and Unimo, Food Producers Zakłady Przetwórcze Gdansk, Agricultural Machinery Repair Works in Tczew, as well as the universities, and I apologise for those I have left out. The authorities tried to win over the Catholic clergy of the Gdansk region by summoning some priests to the offices of the secret police in Ulica Okopowe and trying to persuade them to support the actions of the government and asking them to sign loyalty pledges or assist them by becoming informants. On the 15th December 1981, in the morning, a priest, Father Stanisław Bogdanovich, took a few sacks of food and went to the shipyard. The shipyard was surrounded by the army and tanks. No one stopped him, and he went into the shipyard. Alongside Szymon Pawlicki, one of the strike leaders, he jumped on the roof of the shipyard's gatehouse and started praying through the shipyard's megaphone. He appealed to the soldiers outside to stay calm and not to fight their own people. Later that day, those soldiers who had surrounded the shipyard were withdrawn because once more their superiors considered that they were being too friendly with the people on strike and the local population. This shows locals waving to troops on the armoured personnel carrier and appears to show troops waving back. At around 5:30 in the morning of the 16th of December 1981, new ZOMO units assisted by the army and a special police unit sent from the training school in Szczytno forced an entry into the shipyard via the main gate. There are around 814 government bodies on the ground. In this photograph, we can see that the main gate has been smashed in by the use of military armour. Attempts were made by the strikers to persuade the attackers to come over to their side. This time there was no fraternization as there had been earlier. The attackers used tear gas and batons. Some of the strikers withdrew to the nearby Gdansk repair shipyard. others scattered throughout the halls. It took them nearly 2.5 hours to round up around 3,000 people, 200 of which were arrested, including virtually all the strike leaders. One of those arrested was Mirosław Krupinski, head of Solidarity in northwestern Poland and vice chairman of the National Committee of the Trade Union. He had managed to avoid arrest on the 13th of December 1981 and headed a national strike committee established on that day. He'd managed to smuggle himself into the shipyard. Jan Waszkiewicz was also arrested. He was a member of the National Commission of Solidarity from Lower Silesia and had also avoided arrest on the 13th of December. He was in the shipyard as the National Strike Committee had moved there in order to share the fate of other protesters. On the 16th of December 1981, there were major protests in the streets in Gdansk, particularly those between the railway station and the shipyard. The authorities used tanks firing blank rounds into the crowd, leaving over 300 people injured, according to official accounts, which leads us to assume that the real number was much higher. The next day in the morning, there were street protests again in the vicinity of the railway station, which led to serious disturbances by the afternoon. Around 16:30, the protesters, using anything that came to hand, such as stones or even bottles with fuel, managed to force Zomo to withdraw towards the main railway station. In response, the officers started shooting, wounded several people and killing one. Antony Brawarczyk was a 20-year-old. Whilst returning home, he passed by a demonstration outside the Gdansk headquarters of the Provincial Committee of the Polish United Workers' Party, that's to say the Communist Party. He was not a participant in the demonstration, but he was shot anyway. Whilst his body was being transported to the provincial hospital in Gdansk, Zomo shot exploding firecrackers at it. In the hospital, damage to the spinal cord and brainstem was found. As a result of resuscitation, blood circulation was restored, but Antony Brawarczyk remained clinically dead. He died 6 days later on the 23rd of December 1981. The body of the deceased was not handed over to the family for several days, and permission to hold a funeral was granted on the 31st of December 1981. The identity of the killer has never been discovered. Meanwhile, the Gdansk shipyard, which had been occupied by Zomo and the Polish People's Army, with 30 armoured vehicles, including tanks. In order to prevent further protests, 2 cordons were placed around the entrance to the shipyard. The shipyard was closed until the 28th of December 1981. Then the authorities changed their minds. They needed more time. They claimed that supplies were lacking for ship production and needed to be procured. However, in reality, they feared that what they called extremists were still at large in the shipyard or could be smuggled in, and therefore postponed reopening it until the 4th of January 1982. A simple economic fact is that if anything was to be done at workplaces, then workers had to go there to do it. However, if those workers then went on strike and occupied the premises, the authorities would find themselves in a never-ending cycle. Members of the Solidarity Trade Union Works Committee at the shipyard were more or less forced to sign a declaration of loyalty to the authorities of the Polish People's Republic by the secret police, who, it appears, attempted to turn some into being collaborators. The declaration stated that the signatory believed in the socialist system defined in the Constitution and submitted to the current legal order defined by the military decree proclaimed by the Military Council of National Salvation, WRON. The letter also noted that the union would be recreated in the future and that the signatory did not agree with the use of force by either side. This was a trick by the secret police, who probably intended this to be used in the future in the press, although as it happened after the shootings in the coal mines in Silesia, it was not given over to the mass media. Elsewhere, the authorities were also having success in ending the sit-in strikes. The most crucial, for obvious strategic reasons, was the oil refinery, which was captured on the 19th of December. In order to capture the port of Gdansk, A significant number of Zomo moved to the districts close to the port, such as Brzezno. At the same time, torpedo boats of the Navy approached the quays. Armed troops joined Zomo in hunting down the striking port workers. There were skirmishes with the militia in the streets of Novi Port. Attempts were made to set fire to the local police station. Although the strikers had been cleared out, the port workers did not start working until the 21st of December. The port of Gdansk held out the longest. On the 20th of December, Communist Party functionary Fishback reported that there were no more strikes in the Gdansk region and that the first stage of martial law had been implemented. In order to increase security, the provincial authorities recruited local party volunteers to guard buildings to aid Zomo, the police and the army. When the shipyard was permitted to reopen in the new year, people went back to work. The Military Council of National Salvation, WRON, appointed a military commissar who was to oversee what was going in the shipyard and keep an eye on any political comments expressed. This meant stringent control over all the workers, which of course affected production, which has already been weakened by those who had been arrested. The local secretary of the Communist Party in Gdansk, Tadeusz Fishback, who had earlier gone round to arrest Lech Wałęsa, was deemed to be too liberal by Warsaw. He was replaced by a more hardline communist, Stanisław Bega. This was rather surprising given that on 15 December 1981, Fishback had declared that what he called the extremists in Solidarity would not give up. He said, "They are trying to wreak havoc and organise strikes in various places. At present, any meeting could be used for anything. They cannot be allowed to meet. There must be peace and common sense." In the Gdansk region, during martial law, 239 people were interned by the end of March and 370 by the end of May, of which 168 were released by the end of that month. At the same time, a total of 199 people were arrested for non-compliance with the provisions of the decree of the 13th of December 1981. To conclude, let's have a look at what happened to 4 of the people mentioned here. Mirosław Kropinski was detained in Gdansk and in July 1982 was sentenced to 3.5 years incarceration, which he served in the prison in Łęczyca. In September 1983, he was released under an amnesty. However, he was denied the possibility to work in his profession. In May 1987, he emigrated to Australia, where he was a consultant engineer at Zig Ritters and Partners in Sydney, then design engineer at the Water Authority of Western Australia in Perth and Albany. He retired in 2004 and died in 2010. Jan Waszkiewicz was put on trial and found not guilty and released. Until 1990, he was the chief co-editor of the anti-communist underground paper Bulletin Dolnośląski. He died of COVID-19 on the 25th of March 2021 in Wrocław. Stanisław Furikowski managed to escape from the shipyard after Zomo took it over. He went into hiding but was caught on the 15th of March 1982. On the 1st of June 1982, the Provincial Court of Gdansk sentenced him to 3.5 years imprisonment. On the 28th of March 1983, he was released with his sentence being changed to 4 years probation. I believe he now lives in Gdynia. Former secretary of the Communist Party, Tadeusz Fishback, now 83, I believe still lives in Gdansk. He is no longer directly involved in politics, but openly supported the current ruling political party, PiS. Here he is in a mural in Gdansk, next to Lech Wałęsa, signing the Gdansk Accords on behalf of the communist government in August 1980. Accords which he so blatantly repudiated on behalf of his masters in Moscow only 15 months later. I shall be looking at other aspects of martial law in Poland in other videos, so you might want to subscribe. I am currently doing this on the 40th anniversary, so today is the 13th of December 2021, and I am referring to events which I can recall. I was a witness to the strikes. I witnessed to the strikes of October 1982, as well as the disturbances of the 31st August 1982, amongst other things. So for me, this does have a personal level to it. Anyway, if you want to see more of this type of thing, obviously I can do it. And alternatively, I can go back to my usual stuff, which is related largely to the Second World War. I upload videos at least once a week, always on a Friday at 8 in the evening Central European time. That's 7 in the UK, and I think that's 11 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles. Occasionally at other times as well. Thank you for listening.